Hi guys, welcome to this video, and this video is about this beast here, which is the IXEG 737 Classic, released a couple of weeks ago for X-Plane 10, and a very highly anticipated release it is too. It's been receiving a lot of praise, a lot of people been jumping up and down and enjoying the delights of this wear. However, I'm, as ever, going to be slightly more critical and slightly more guarded in my comments, purely out of the fact that my belief is there's no such thing as a perfect aircraft, and even the PMDG, the might of PMDG, don't have perfect aircraft. So with that in mind, we will look at it as objectively as we can. Now, I'm going to change slightly from my normal format of doing a complete review at this point. This is just my initial impressions, which actually will probably end up being more than most people's reviews in many respects. However, as is my wont, we're going to have a quick look at it. Now, before I go any further, one of the things I'm going to do is just highlight the element in relation to this that I think has been missed by a small proportion of people with regards to this aircraft. This is the 737 Classic. It is not the NGX, it is not the NG, it is not next generation. I'll just pop inside to demonstrate what I mean by this. This is our little box of tricks, the FMC. Actually, first thing to note is it shouldn't come up with this page. Yes, we're running, but we haven't set anything up on the FMC. It should start with that page, the ident. That's the one it should come up with. But this little box of tricks, the operating program is in here. I don't know why it is this one. I'll explain all about that in a moment. We'll go through that, but you can see it's got a current air rack at the moment. Now, in terms of the key thing here, well, there's two key things. The first thing is this box here. Since the inception of the 737 Classic series and now into the NG, having gone through the Bill Bulfer's book in relation to the FMC, there have been 24 revisions to this. Now, by revision, I'm not just on about tiny little bits of data. There have been basically 24/25 if you include the original, 25 versions of the software that have gone into this box. To put it into another context, there are 3 different physical boxes where, for example, one of them has, the more modern one has direct intercept, for example. However, despite the outward appearances, that means that the FMCs are not all identical and they do not all operate identically because they have different software fits. What's, I suppose, interesting, I suppose, in some respects is the fact that because of the IXEG moniker here, we're not quite sure exactly which model of the software or which version of the software it was that it was compared against, or modelled on, I should say. This is the other element. To most 737 fans, this will look immediately welcoming and a homely sight. However, and this is the big however, when Boeing went through the design philosophy for their 737s, one of the things they wanted to do is to have the same familiarity. Now, familiarity is not the same as something being the same. Familiarity is that you feel comfortable in that environment and you have some understanding or comprehension of the location of switches, etc. And Boeing stated as much. I read a document on it, oh God, must be about 10 years ago now, where Boeing basically had, or there was the inference that Boeing had significantly different systems between the Classic and the NG. However, what they wanted to do was continue the appearance, the commonality in terms of appearance and features, despite the fact that the underlying systems were often significantly different. Obvious ones are things like the pressurization panel down here. That's gone through a number of changes over the years. The most common ones on the NG are fairly well automated now, so things like that are different. Things like the electrical management are slightly different. Things like the cabin heating, for example, is slightly different, and they're all the various minor things. There are some more significant elements underneath that engineers would be familiar with that maybe you and I won't be troubled with. However, fundamentally, it's worth remembering that as an aircraft, this is a previous generation to the 737 NG. Why do I mention that? Well, I mention that because when this thing first came out, there were 3 things that were notable. The first thing was that as a release decision, they decided to release it in what some, myself included, would state was an incomplete version of their target. So in effect, this is not really what IXEG wanted to release, but they did the very brave thing of releasing a list of features that would not be in V1.0. which I think is absolutely stonking of them. I think it's a very brave thing to do, because it's not often that you have a developer who will go, well, all developers, when they advertise their wares, they will basically say, these are the features we're really proud of, i.e. these are the features we've achieved, we think we've done well, clap your hands, laud us, enjoy our work, but beware the bits we haven't mentioned, because either we couldn't do them, we didn't do them, or we haven't done them very well. So I actually applaud a developer and a team who actually acknowledge, well, our product doesn't do this, this and this, so don't expect it to. Don't come to us upset when it doesn't do things we told you it wouldn't do. So for me, that release sort of decision, in some respects is a good one because it's open and honest. In other respects, it's a tad frustrating when features haven't been included. So I think one of the features, for example, is offset root. You can't fly an offset root, even though the FMC in the real thing is capable of it. It's just not implemented as of yet. There's no TCAS, for example, as of yet. And there's a few other omissions. Some are more significant than others, it has to be said. So for me, the fact that you can't get to see the cabin is of little significance, because I never go there anyway. But for some people, that's a biggie. In terms of bugs, when this thing came out on day one, there were two real issues that came out. The first thing is that the website didn't have the capacity for the number of people who tried to purchase and download the product, which I suppose in some respects, I think it's always difficult for a developer and a publicist to actually figure out how much demand there's going to be. But we knew there would be a lot. However, one of the things that struck was a bug. Quite a few bugs, to be fair, a lot of which have been squashed in the very first sort of couple of days after release. But one of which was actually quite surprising, in as much as there's a plugin called XP UIPC, which is basically, I'm not really a coder, but as far as I understand, it's kind of like a bridge, if you want, that acts between different sort of programs, plugins or facilities to enable the sim to communicate with other things. As a result of that, a lot of people had issues where the aircraft was pogoing in pitch, or having real issues with the autopilot, predominantly because the sim wasn't working, or the aircraft wasn't working well with XP UIPC. Now, XP UIPC is one of the most common plugins that there is. There are a lot of common plugins, but that's one of the more common. So it's used for things like Squawkbox, for example, to get onto VATSIM, etc. It surprised me that such a significant issue could be found with such a commonly used plugin. Now, I don't expect add-on developers to go and check every single permutation. It's just physically impossible. But I find that a little bit surprising. However, it was repaired and remedied very, very quickly afterwards, which is, if you like, the good news following the little bit of confusion, is that a lot of these major things have been cleared up very quickly. Now, one of the things that's prevalent in the forums, and I subscribe to this theory, and some people may go yaboo, hiss, whatever. There's an element of operator error in a lot of issues that some people are having, or in some issues that some people are having. Let's be fair here. A lot of people have mentioned about LNAV and VNAV not working. LNAV and VNAV in here work differently. So in the 737NG, you can plug them in on the ground before you even taxi out. And actually, it's one of the checks to know that your route, etc., everything you've got is set up correctly, is that you can switch these on the ground, and all is hunky-dory. That's not how the 737 Classic works. Allow me, if my phone will stop bleeping, to bring this up. This is from the Continental 737 FCOM from the Continental airline. There are quite a few resources out there for the 737, as you would expect, given the nature of the aircraft. However, interesting words, in fact, if I pull this one up as well, this is a US Airways 737 Classic sort of set of handling notes, is the best way of describing it. I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote them. What page are we on here? We're on page 72. Let's just go up to the top and get his details. 72. Eric Parks, well known Eric Parks, and he is indeed known for this particular document. As you can see, there's an awful lot to it. However, takeoff. Go through all this. Where's the important bit? Right. Selected. Here's an important bit. Selected. LNAV may be selected. So in other words, you cannot select LNAV below 400 feet. Okay? Heading after takeoff should be set, blah, 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 to heading selected prior to 400 feet. After 400 feet, the flight director will command normal bank angle. So basically what it's saying here is your lateral guidance, in terms of going left and right, you don't select your lateral guidance till after 400 feet above airfield elevation. Flight directors must be on until a minimum of 1,000. This is the US Airways. It does vary airline to airline. An autopilot may be selected on above 1,200 feet airfield elevation. VNAV may be selected on for speed control above 3,000 feet. Now this comes into play with a significant bit, and this is one of the elements, is that with a 737NG, you know, people get very used to, let's just press VNAV, press LNAV, and yeah, okay, the lights have gone on, we're okay. You'll see with this departure profile, and we'll follow the VNAV one in particular because one of the things that people questioned was VNAV. You can see you can do a VNAV departure and a level change departure. There's not that many differences between the two, but we'll go through the VNAV one. You can see before takeoff you arm the auto throttle. Fine, hunky-dory. You then go roaring off down the runway. Above 400 feet, the pilot flying calls out heading select or LNAV. So chooses one of the two lateral guidance modes. So you are not selecting your lateral guidance mode until you're at least 400 feet above the ground. Then at 1,000 feet, with your VNAV departure, after flaps 5 and flaps 15 takeoffs with at least VREF plus V2 plus 15, basically you can then go through your flaps retraction and go into VNAV. Now this is the key thing, you can't choose your speed stroke vertical navigation until after 1,000 feet above airfield elevation. That is the profile. That is what we should be doing when we take off in this thing. And it's important to note that if you then are applying this profile to the 737 Classic, it does exactly what it says on the tin. So, you know, in a lot of respects, you know, this document is huge, by the way. 2,129 pages of it all. Absolute beautiful document, but it contains, as you would imagine, a vast amount of useful information. But the fundamental thing here is when you fly the departure as you do with this one, then it flies exactly how you would expect it to fly. So this is one of the key things for me, is I have but don't really fly the PMDG 737NG. It just doesn't excite me. I find it, as an aircraft, I find it, I suppose the best way is devoid of character. It's like watching TV screens. For me, it is not an exciting aircraft. I like to see dials, I like to see needles, I like to see bits and bobs and elements that make an aircraft characterful. Now, before I go any further, what I will do is I'll mention a couple of things that are the reasons why I think this appeals to me more than, say, the NG. Interesting events. So as I say, we've got different systems despite the outward similarity in appearances, but we do have different systems. And for example, the early version Classics didn't have EFIS. So they had the FMC, but they had steam gauges here. And, you know, FlyJSim, FJS are coming up with a 727 and a 732, which will have XFMC, I think it's XFMC compatibility. So you'll be able to fly the 737-200 with an FMC with steam gauge instruments. It did exist as a 737 Classic with steam gauges and an FMC, so you know, cracking idea. Really like that idea. However, back to the case in point. This FMC has gone through, as I say, 24 revisions in terms of software. So as a result, it's more limited in its capacity and capabilities than the NGs. By default, it will be because it's an older generation. The engine instruments came into sort of scrutinization, or into scrutiny is a better way of putting it, after the Kegworth Air disaster. For those who aren't familiar, the Kegworth Air disaster was a disaster in the UK where a 737 had an engine fire. There was confusion on the aircraft as to which engine had the fire, and ultimately they shut down the good engine and tried to recover to East Midlands Airport on an ailing engine. Now, a couple of things to note here. People might go, oh, how do you shut down the good engine? There was an air accident investigation board and ended up looking into these dials as one of the elements. And they looked into the dials for a couple of reasons. Not because they could see their winning lottery numbers, but one of the things I do like is I can do this on the fly. Preferences, go over here, steam gauges. Look at that. Look at that. In fact, if I do that, we get an even better view. So these are the original steam gauges. This is what would have been out on the very, very early models. And personally, I quite like a lot of these gauges like this because they are similar to those which I saw in things like Sea Kings when I was a young lad flying around in the back of them. But nonetheless, you know, these are the older style gauges, the steam gauges. These are the more modern style. And there was a couple of things that came out. How could you end up turning off the wrong engine? Well, there's confusion over the dials because there's four columns of dials. Engine 1, Engine 2, Engine 1, Engine 2. And one of the things the Air Accident Investigation Board said is that there were two things. The layout wasn't automatically intuitive in terms of which dial is for which engine. They suggested it might have been better to have a core of two columns of bigger instruments, where that was left-hand engine main instruments, that was right-hand engine main instruments, that was left-hand engine secondary instruments, left-hand engine, right-hand engine secondary instruments. That was one of the things that they looked at, and they looked at that in terms of the human factors. But the second thing is, look at the vibration gauges here. If I go back to the steam gauges, just make sure the parking brake is on. I think it is. It is, because I'm just going to put a bit of power on the engines. If you look down here at these needles, and I put a bit of power on, you can see the movement of the needles. The fuel flow is a nice easy one at low power settings. You can see the movement. You can also see if there's a differential in movement. It's a nice big indicator. So a lot of the flight crews prefer this older setup, whereas if you go to the more modern setup, first off, things like oil quantities are numerical. So yeah, that's great, but it's a numerical value. So unless you are paying attention, and in effect what they're saying is that these have a much greater visual cue in terms of what's going on than these, because ultimately you're looking for tiny little green LEDs. These are the more modern style, but a lot of people prefer the older steam gauge. But look down here at the vibration gauge. It's one of the gauges they looked for during the Kegworth air disaster, and you can see it's a tiny little line that they're hunting for. It was dark, it was confusing, and they were in a cockpit with an ailing aircraft, strong smells of smoke, screaming passengers, all the classical sort of airline disaster stuff. But you know, that would have been a terrifying experience for all involved. Unfortunately, they misidentified the faulty engine, and a lot of things went through in terms of discussing the panel design. And I know a recommendation went to Boeing, but I don't think ultimately anything changed. But that was the UK Air Accident Investigation Board challenged this. So things like this, having access to these two sets of instruments, for me are quite interesting, because you can see clearly that this is a more visual representation. It's harder to read the numbers, but it's easier to see, if you like, a visual representation when you've got a big needle as opposed to you know, one of these tiny little pipper things here. You know, yes, we've got the numerical representation, but we've got these tiny little things, and the vibration is particularly bad. So I think we'll stick with this for the moment. That brings me on to the element, I suppose, of the menus. The menu system's quite straightforward. I do like having the master sound volume. That's very good. I do like a lot of these things. You can choose winglets and camera shaking. It's got its own built-in camera shaking. I'm not normally a fan of camera shaking because sometimes I feel it's overdone and it's like being in a washing machine. And I know you can tailor these things, but I am a bit lazy fundamentally. However, this doesn't seem to be overdone, so I don't mind the camera shaking in this, because if the camera's shaking, I can still press the switch, which is important. Reset aircraft on location, all these good things. Now, there's quite a few things in the menu that are not currently active. So the cabin crew, for example, obviously the cabin's not currently active, so things like that aren't active. The view presets, I am not a fan of this. I will say it outright now. I am not a fan of this, because I changed the field of view, and it affects X-Plane as a whole as well. I thought it would only affect the aircraft. It affects X-Plane as well. So when I went into my preset views of every other aircraft, they were all out. And then I tried to reset this, and for whatever reason this didn't want to know. Then I ended up going back in, and it's been a pain, and as a result I just don't like this panel. I would rather use my own presets through the normal X-Plane 10 system. I'm not convinced as to the benefits of this, if I'm honest. If I'm brutally honest, I'm not really convinced of the benefits of that. However, that's just a personal opinion. I do like the fact you can turn the sound down. We will turn it up in a bit, purely out of the fact that actually it sounds very nice. So that's preferences. Pre-flight you can choose. It's got a nice quick fuel planner. If you know the distance between point A and point B, you can do that. Choose your states, choose your fuel, zero fuel weight. All of this stuff is very, very good. And we'll remember that. That's 40 tons and then the fuel, whatever. So remember, zero fuel weight, 40 tons. Ground service is good. You can set your fueling. We'll set ours to 5.5 tons and we'll set it for instant. And pushback, it's got a pushback system. In terms of nose left, nose right, it's a bit clumsy because it doesn't let you decide how far back you go before you turn left or right. But nonetheless, you know, it works of a fashion. It's a very nice feature to have. Cabin crew we've just mentioned, view presets we've mentioned, and failures. At the moment, to the best of my knowledge, they may be active, but recharge battery, I don't know how active they are. I haven't gone through this. As I say, this is just an initial look at it, but potentially there's going to be failure modelling. I don't know, as I say, to what extent that is currently modelled. We'll just jump out again, jump out of here. Now, the UK Air Accident Investigation Board, this is one of the reasons, again, why I like the Classic, is because as a pilot's aircraft, it's got a lot to try and grasp hold of. Auto throttle. Yes, you've got an annunciator up here and you've got your auto throttle with the green light. If it comes off, trips off for whatever reason, yes, you get a little red flashing light, but there's no audible warning. There's no audio cues to tell you that it's gone. And one of the things that pilots are renowned for is if a flashing light's there, they tend to press it. To shut it up, cancel it, remove it, whatever. It can be quite subconscious because one of the things that certainly when I was doing my my multi-crew cooperation course, one of the things that's quite common is one pilot will acknowledge something, they will press the light to cancel it before the other pilot's seen it, and you need to communicate that between the two of you. However, this lack of warning of an auto throttle became an issue because basically what happened was they were flying an ILS approach. It was a full approach, so autopilot flying the glide slope and the localizer, and also the auto throttle controlling the speed. Now, when you do a descent on the ILS, there's two modes that the vertical modes can operate in the aircraft. It can either have throttle controlling speed, which is the case with an ILS descent, or it can have speed controlled by pitch. But in this case, the 737 was controlling its speed using the throttle. And with an auto throttle disconnect, no audible warning, the crew missed it, and what happened is the speed started decaying. Now, as the speed decays, the only way the aircraft can maintain the glide slope, the position on the glide slope, is to pitch up, and to pitch up, and to pitch up. Well, of course, when the autopilot is acting and functioning, it does that by adjusting the trim. So this thing's furiously trimming nose up to try and fix the issue. And so what you've got is an issue where the nose is continually rising as the wing is desperately trying to generate more lift to maintain this glide slope. But as the speed is dropping away, it's struggling more and more. And eventually what you get is a situation where it had full nose up elevator trim, which is not a good state of affairs because this thing is already, struggling to stay in the air, and you've now got it at full nose up pitch trim. However, at 20 knots below their VREF, their reference speed for landing, that's when they initiated recovery. But what happened is you then had a power pitch couple, an issue, because these are low slung engines. So if you imagine your thrust line is parallel to this engine, your drag line is higher up, but more importantly you've got a lot of nose up trim. And what happened was they had a lot of thrust pushing the bottom of the aircraft, causing a nose up moment. They had full nose up trim, so that was causing a nose up moment, and when they applied the power, the thing went straight into a 44-degree nose up climb. The speed dropped back to 82 knots, and all credit to the crew, they managed to get that thing back. I have no idea what it would be like to be 45 degrees nose up in a 737 that's only doing 82 knots. That's the equivalent of an airliner doing a stall turn. That's pretty scary stuff. However, the aircrew got it back, so maybe that's a testament to the crew, maybe that's a testament to the aircraft. I suspect it's testament to both. But this is one of the things in terms of the human factors element of the 737 Classic, is that it's not all plain sailing. Now, I'm going to say this again, in terms of the systems, it's worth reading the manual. It's worth reading the manual and going through the tutorials, because this is not an NG, and if you can fly the NG, there's a pretty good chance you'll be able to fly this. In fact, I'm 99.9% certain you'll be able to fly this, but what you'll come across is little differences or inconsistencies that will be a case of, well, why is that doing that? Why is that doing that? Pretty much the chances are 9 times out of 10 it's going to be something where there's a difference in terms of the operation or the functionality of the system between the two aircraft. Yes, the 737 has a common type rating. So if you get a 737 type rating, it's common across the 300, the Classics through to the NGs. However, airlines also do differences training. There are actual publications out there to do differences training between the NG and the Classic, because there are sufficient differences. You can publish a book on the back of it. So, you know, that's worth bearing in mind. Now, let me see, is it, I'm just going to, you won't see it on the screen, I'm just going to call up my email in the other screen, because there was an element of it, of all of this release. I got it the other day in terms of an email, and I have to say this is one of the things that really irked me. Compared to some, there's not actually been that many. You know, some people have had a far rougher ride than I have, but I think this was just a bit of a slap in the face for someone who's just paid $75 for this thing. Okay, this thing is $75. I'm going to read the opening line of an email that I received. Let me see, when was it? It was Friday. So it's not long ago, Friday. Obviously, after the initial issues, they then released, I think it was the following day, they released a hotfix patch. To do the hotfix patch, you go up into plugins, Gizmo 64, Windows, and if you go to hotfix, the email gives you a hotfix ID, you type it in there or put it in the update, and then you can reboot the aircraft and all is well. The only thing I've done is I've done my update, my hotfix update for 1.0.2, and for some reason it's not taken. Either this hasn't changed as an indication, or it just hasn't taken, and I don't know which of the two it is. I'm probably going to have to reinstall everything again, which is going to be most frustrating. However, I'm very grateful to receive an email on Friday which said the following: hello, X-Aviation and IXEG are pleased to offer you a free upgrade to version 1.0.2 of the IXEG 737 Classic. I'm sorry, you're offering me a free upgrade to fix bugs in an aircraft. It's not an upgrade, is it? It's just basically fixing bugs. I think it's probably one of the most poorly worded emails I've received in a while, that they're very kindly letting me have some bug fixes to an aircraft I paid $75 for. It doesn't scream happiness at me, because it's very much a case of, well, I'm not being funny, guys. I paid $75 for what is arguably supposed to be a premium product. There have been quite a few issues with it, and now you're pleased to offer me a free upgrade. I should hope you feel pleased to offer me a free upgrade. I would have expected a free upgrade anyway, not necessarily offered, just provided. So yeah, poorly worded emails aside, I'm glad to see that they have produced two hotfixes now, two hotfix updates now. And I have had some issues with this. I think a lot of people have, but maybe I've had fewer than others. What we're going to do now is we're just going to quickly jump outside, and in fact we'll go into this camera mode. And again, my film panning standards aren't particularly great. Okay, so in terms of the aircraft at a distance, it looks very good. It looks like a 300. It looks classic. There's some nice animation features, in particular in terms of the engines, the N1 fan stage, the low pressure stage of the engine, and it all looks really nice. And then we get to some areas where it's like, well, you know, this is a premium product. I'm paying $75. What exactly am I getting for my money? So this is the Lufthansa livery. I think there's two liveries. There's a classic and a modern, I suppose, is the best way of describing it. And you look at it and you go, there's some really nice ideas in terms of the vortex generators here, and the markings coming over from the vortex generators. Looks really nice. On first impression, you know, you think that's really, really good. That's I'm happy with that. The difficulty I have is that the textures don't stand close scrutiny at all. You know, this is very sort of not even particularly close in, I don't know quite what's going on with that shadow. It's no doubt X-plane rather than the aircraft. But as soon as I go in here, you can see it's scruffy. It looks unfinished. It looks untidy. There's areas where it's a bit of a sort of what the heck is going on here. You know, there's ports that are just basically blobs. The texturing, I'll be bluntly honest here, guys, is not great. It could be argued that you don't necessarily buy this add-on for eye candy, but at $75 I'd expect it to have a very high standard of modelling regardless. And you see the textures in terms of, we've got beautiful textures around here for the screws, and then, you know, there's other areas where it's just indistinct, nondescript, you know, untidy, scruffy in appearance. It's not really what I would have expected for $75. That's a lot of money, you know, by anybody's standards. That's a lot of money. But what's that doing there? Yeah, it's cut off. Texturing, there's bits of that missing where it's been cut off with the overpaint. So yeah, it's in terms of shaping, formation, it looks like a 737. There's areas I think where basically it's weaker than I would have want. I'll highlight a couple of the ones for me that are well, there's three I can think of that are relatively significant. There are areas where there's an overlap between the 3D objects and the texturing and the aircraft skin, and these, to be fair, they don't appear to have any great deal of texturing or coloration to them. They look pretty straightforward. You've got a lovely crisp leading edge here in terms of looking at this black line here, and then it goes to a very indistinct fuzzy track here for the stabilizer for when it runs. You've got what appears to be untextured area down here, yet the intake there is textured. You've got a really nice light appearance there. However, you know, you go to other areas down here and it's just a blurred mess. So there's a lot of stuff going on here where there's a lot of stuff which is okay, a lot of stuff which is good, but unfortunately there's also other stuff which is not so good, and some of it is also quite simple. So let me just come around this way. It's this kind of thing that sort of detracts a little bit for me in terms of 3D modelling. There is work to be done. I think it's safe to say. I don't know of another $75 product that has its 3D modelling at that level. Yet, ironically, you go down to where the wing lights are, and it's really rather beautiful. And this is one of my things that I will probably return to this as a sort of a pattern throughout this. Is there are areas where you think it's just not quite finished. Now, of course, the question mark there is always going to be, well, not has it been rushed out, but has it been brought out in terms of customer demand a little bit too early, or could they have spent longer polishing it? So you see I bring it down, there's no textures here. Here's the thing I was interested in. Look, here's your aileron trim tab on here, on the top surface on the right hand side, but yet on the underneath it's on the left hand side, and you've got your actuator section here. You'd have an actuator rod within there, and you can see that's not even modelled in 3D. So we've got the vortex generators, the static wicks, etc. But there's areas that haven't even been modelled 3D. And this is the key thing for me, is that there's a lot of stuff in here that's very, very good. Don't get me wrong. I think that, as an example, the Rotate Sim 3D modelling is better. I think the texturing is certainly better. But it's actually the element here is, what is it you're going to be using the sim for? Because the Rotate Sim MD80 is not a study sim. There's an element that this is purporting to be a study sim, or pretty damn close to a study sim. So, you know, there's areas where it's a little bit disappointing in the exterior modelling, particularly in textures. However, I think overall it's very pretty, very accurate looking model from what I can see. Just a little bit scruffy around the edges and a bit unfinished. If I go to a different aircraft, what we'll do is we'll go open aircraft, we'll go to the British Airways one, just change the livery. There's areas of this where the texturing just looks horrible. I'm sorry, but that just, I'm not getting it. I'm not getting that at all, guys. I don't know what it is. But for me, that one just doesn't cut it. I mean, that even looks like they're misaligned, do they? Strange alignment there. You can see the centre line of the textures comes down here, and they're all over the place. So, yeah, externally, I think the best way of describing it is it's still a work in progress. In terms of systems, the systems functionality, there's a long list of stuff on the, I think it's ex-aviation forums possibly, about what is and what isn't active. However, in terms of operating the aircraft, the vast majority of things that you need, and I said the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of the things you need on a day-to-day basis appear to be in place and appear to be working relatively satisfactorily. I have had some issues with LNAV and VNAV. The LNAV issue is when there was a route in, I had an LNAV route planned in, and it got to a turn point which just so happened to be at the top of the star, and the aircraft just flew in a straight line. It just wasn't interested. It fell off the magenta line, I suppose is the best way of describing it. So at that point I went, hang on a minute, there's an issue here, let's go direct intercept to the next waypoint. And it did do it, but don't leave it and don't sort of leave it to go and do its own thing. It will have the occasional hiccup. I'll show you one of the hiccups in a moment. I'm not sure. I think this might be a nav database issue as opposed to how the FMC is interpreting it and using the data. But I think there is an issue as well around here. I think the Midhurst beacon is just ridiculously out of position in terms of something that's going on here. I haven't quite got my thumb on it yet. Little things. Nav 1, Nav 2 have no standby. I don't know any airliner to the top, to the that doesn't have a standby frequency selector per box. I'm not aware of any. If there are, I don't imagine they would have been in circulation for very long, because it's one of the most commonly used things in a nav box is the ability to pre-select a standby frequency during the downtime, so that during the busy time it's dead easy to select and switch over. So I find that odd. I can't say that some of these aircraft definitely didn't have it or definitely did have it, but I just find it odd. That seems to me to be a little bit inconsistent. We're going to chuck a program in the FMC. It's not going to be Space Invaders, I'm afraid, but we're going to chuck some programming in and see how we get on with this. What I need to do on the other side is just pull up my flight plan. So it should have started on this. It didn't, but now we're back on it, so it's not a problem. So we're going to go to Echo Golf Kilo Kilo. Well, we're not going to go there. We are there. We're not at a gate. We're at the runway, so it's pre-populated all the details correctly. And if I go to the next page, you can see it's got all the FMC positions for the IRS and the GPS. And again, it's got some of the further details in terms of the accuracies you can see here. So it's got the accuracies in terms of 0.2 nautical miles, for example, 0.1. And it's a nice feature that does change. A lot of the times you'll see add-ons where these are just static and they don't do anything. In fairness, I'm not going to sit there and update it. It can update either, the FMC can update either through the GPS positioning, or it can update through DME cross fixes to just check its own accuracy. It can do that all automatically. So really you don't generally use that page very much, but we'll go around here. We'll go to the route. Now, first thing is, normally Echo Golf Kilo Kilo would pre-populate down here. It hasn't. Not a massive issue, we can just do that. We are going to go to Echo Golf Sierra Charlie. We're not really going to go there, we're just going to program it in. And it's going to mention and discuss an element to do with VNAV. So what we will do is put in a departure and arrival. A departure is going to be off 26 left, and next page, and it's the Kennet 2 Mike we're going to go off. Take us to Kennet. That will all be really, really nice. Go to the route. That takes us to Kennet, and from there we're going November 14 to Octad. November 14 Octad. Octad. And so on and so forth. So once I finish putting all this in, I shall see you in a moment. So I've now filled the rest of the route in thus far. You can see we've got all the waypoints and all the turn points and the airways. Not going to activate it just yet. Going to go to the next page. You can see it gets to Sivda. Okay, so what's the significance of that? Well, let's just go down here and we'll change this to a plan. Probably pop that up to about yeah, we'll do it at 40 to start with. Right, so here's our plan. We're down here. The first thing we're going to do now is go to the legs page, and you can see here we are, and it's got this strange bit here is the best way of describing it. Step. Now Midhurst, this is what I'm on about, is the Midhurst beacon. It's showing it as here. Let's actually go down a range I'll just go down one more. I do like this feature, by the way, that when you change these, you see the impact of it over here. That for me is a really nice touch. Really helps if you're changing switches, you've got a reference. It's got Midhurst here. It's got 10 miles from Midhurst here, and 8 miles from Midhurst here, and 10 miles here. So by its own definition, it knows that that's the 10-mile range ring, and that's the 8-mile range ring on the waypoints on the database. Yet it's got Midhurst over here, and actually Midhurst should be over here. So there's something wrong with the nav database. Let's just take Kennet and do that one. That's better. We'll do that. So that's what we're looking at now. Let's go all the way back and go step. Right, so that's better. At least it looks like a semi-decent departure. We're not going to go flying off into the sticks. So it goes all the way around the route. As you can see, it's going all over the place, and it gets to CIVDA. Now this is one of the reasons why you won't get a VNAV connect. VNAV, in the way it works things out, and I'll just expand the display to help me with this. This thing for me, for some unknown reason, seems particularly sensitive to the double click mechanism that X-Plane 10 has for, if you like, fixing the view to the camera. You see, it's doing it again. It's really irritating. Okay. So here's CIVDA. This is the final point on our flight plan before we have our landing airfield. Now in terms of VNAV, you'll notice it's not on the legs page. The airfield isn't on the legs page as such. What we're going to do is we're just going to go to route. I'm having a complete... There we go. Let's just activate that and execute it and make it all solid and magenta. Right, legs. You'll see that although we've got everything there, it still stops at CIVDA at the end. So we'll go all the way through all of that, and we get to CIVDA. Now what it needs for a VNAV profile is, if you imagine this line is the ground across here, and this is the point we want to get to. Let's say it's this point here. So it's a certain height above the ground, and we want to descend to that height. So it might be the pattern altitude, it might be the final approach fix altitude for, or the initial approach fix altitude for an instrument approach, or whatever it might be. But you've got a path that comes down, slides down, and eventually you get to this point. Older VNAV setups like this in the 737 with the FMC for the older classic, you need to give it a defined clear point at the end. You need to tell it and say, right, this is my final point, and it needs to be what would be concerned as a constraint point or a defined point. You can't just stick an altitude in and expect VNAV to work to there, because it doesn't know that that's your final altitude. So at the moment, if you tried to engage VNAV, you would get nothing out of this, because it would see the route or perceive the route as incomplete. And you need some final defined point. The obvious way to get a final defined point is simply just to put in your departure or arrival. Now, another inconsistency here is normally for a quick return to your airfield, you will have an arrival option alongside your origin airport. We don't have that here. However, without further ado, we'll go here. What we're going to do is do an ILS for 2-3, and we're not going to bother with any transition, so we'll just execute that. And that should be all fine. Now, there's a little gap here. You can just see the gap here. What I'm going to do is just come down here. We'll reduce the range. This is why I like this now. Look, there we go. That's too far. That'll do. So you can see there's a gap there. So the VNAV still won't work, because now we've got our final defined point, which is down here. And if I go to the legs, you'll be able to see it. So we'll step through. Oh, this double click. It seems more sensitive on this aircraft than any others I have for X-Plane 10, and I don't know if it's the sim, I don't know if it's my mouse or what. So we get to CIVDA, we want to join up the dots. You can see we've got a discontinuity. So with a discontinuity, the element here is, you can see now we've got altitudes entered in that are, if you like, the hard constraint altitudes. The main one here is this 1700 for the final fix for 2-3. That is a constraint altitude, it's a hard constraint, and basically it's the start of the approach. Center fix 2-3 and the final fix 2-3 are parts of your approach. What we need to do is we need to just join them up so we don't get the discontinuity, and then that will enable VNAV to engage, because you've got a continuous line, and what it can do is, what it wants to do is just go, well, actually you want to be 1700 feet at that point. So in order to make that 1700 feet, you need to be at that height from there, that height from there, that height from there, and you see it as the list of altitudes that go down here. So what we can do now is we're going to go to init ref, we're going to do our performance pages. Zero fuel weight we said was 40 tons. which goes in there. Reserves we'll put at 1.5 just as a nominal figure. It's already put a pre-populated cost index of 20. I just wonder if I can change it to 25. Yeah, it will let me do that. Cruise altitude is going to be low today. We're going to be down in the weeds at flight level 180. Not going to bother going any higher. Pre-populates a lot of the details here. Now, I haven't gone through the FMC in great detail. We will execute that now. What I will say, however, is the 737, most 737s, only have one FMC. They have two CDUs, two controller display units, but they're both attached to the one computer. That's one of the reasons why this has what's called fail passive for an approach system. So for a fully automated landing, you would have both autopilots in. The theory is that you have fail passive, so if one fails, you've got a second autopilot which is working, but it's deemed as passive because it's got nothing to check it and cross-reference it. So in theory, if this was inaccurate, it could still fly you into the ground. So in effect, basically what it means is that you've got two sets of control systems or two sets of checking systems against the controls. You've got one autopilot and another autopilot checking it. Whereas if you've got the three autopilot buttons you see on things like the 777 or the 747, that's fail active, because even if one system fails, you've got two furthers which are available as comparators. So this is a fail passive system. What you do get is 737s that do actually have two FMCs. I don't think there are many out there, but they do exist. So yeah, it's the whole system appears to have been modelled pretty well, to be honest. I think there's still quite a lot of features in here that are yet to be activated. However, let's just press on through this. We're not going to do any derates and for this. Now, flaps takeoff, flaps 5 is a most common one. Flaps 15 can be done. What you've got to bear in mind with flaps is, I'll just get a straight line to demonstrate this. Let's say this is our available runway from here to here. With a flaps 15, you'll generally have a shorter ground roll, so you might take off here, but you'll have a very shallow climb out angle because of the drag. So you've got high lift, but you've also got high drag. High lift means you get off the ground earlier, high drag means you don't climb as quickly. However, on flaps 5, you take longer to go along the ground because you're in a lower lift. You've got lower lift potential, if you like. However, what happens is climb is based on the amount of excess thrust the aircraft has, so your climb performance will be much better. So if you're trying to do obstacle avoidance or noise sort of abatement, for want of a better way of putting it, where you want to try and get away from the ground as quick as you can, if you have the runway available, you'd be doing flaps 5, possibly even flaps 1. I don't know if the airlines do flaps 1 much, but I suspect there'll be somebody out there willing to share that knowledge. And anyway, we can pre-populate these, and we can get our various details through that. 120, 122, 132. Now I'm not going to get too carried away with doing the speed bugs around here. I will do one, however. In fact, I'll do two. Let's just get rid of these. The only two I'm going to be interested in at the moment are 132. In fact, sorry, 122, which is that there, and 137. Now 137 is our V2 plus 15. Sorry, no, what am I on about? V2 is 132, 147 I want. V2 plus 15 is the one I'm going to put there, and then I'll put V2 up here, 132. Nice and close. So where we're at basically is, this is rough and ready. This isn't how you're supposed to do it, but that's going to be rotate stroke V1, that's V2, that's V2 plus 15, which is basically your minimum climb out speed that you would aim for, somewhere in the region of 15 to 20 degrees nose up, you would imagine, at your takeoff thrust setting for that. Now, looking across the MCP, we've already discussed the fact that there is a very different mode of operation in terms of getting this thing going. In terms of operating it, you don't operate it the same as an NG, so what we're going to do is we're going to set it up. This becomes the master one. As soon as you turn that flight director on, you get the little orange annunciator master, and you also get it over here saying that the flight director is now active. If I put this one on as well now, flight director on that side is active, and you can see that it's got active on both. It's just that that hasn't got the master annunciation. Auto throttle goes to arm. You'll see that it comes up with a green box to say there's been a change in the condition, and it's saying that it's armed and it's ready to go. So the flight director is on. Here's a difference with the NG. There is no visual flight director at this stage. You can see the green box has gone because there's no longer a change in the condition. But you can see there's no actual visible flight director. The flight director doesn't actually become active or live until we press the toga buttons and we take off. So again, you know, I don't really fly the NG that much. It doesn't excite me, so to speak, but this one I really enjoy the nuances of it and the various things. It's interesting to turn the flight directors on, for example, and not actually see a flight director. It's one of those kind of odd things. So at the moment, what we're not going to do is we're not going to select any of these. What we are going to do is we're going to set our heading. In fact, before we do that, we are going to go down here and we're going to put this back to where we want this bad boy to be, which is on map. We're also going to reduce the range down to there. I'm not going to worry too much about the first officer side. I'm just going to mess around with this side at the moment. And you can see what we've got there as our setup already. And what we're going to do is going to bring the heading round to pretty much match the heading we're on. So what was it, 258, something like that? About there. And our initial climb altitude is 4,000 in terms of this departure. So we'll plug that in, and that's pretty much everything set up ready to go. So we're going to just do a very quick set of ham-fisted before start takeoff checks. We're just going to make sure there's no obvious scary lights, make sure the landing lights are on, don't want taxi, don't want any of that, make sure the APU is off, all of that looks good. All of that looks good. Galley power is on. All of those are sorted, all of those are on. There's no scary lights anywhere. They are on continuous as well. We're on the runway, so we want strobes, positions should be on, and anti-coal should be on. We'll pop out and have a look at the nice pretty lights in a moment. That's all as expected. Key switch here is this one, flight. We haven't actually set that up yet, so we'll go up here. And we're going for 18,000 feet, nothing too dramatic. And this switch here is apparently one of the ones that was related to the Helios air disaster, where the Cypriot plane crashed. Cabin altitude. Now this you put 200 feet below your landing altitude. Our landing altitude over at Cambridge is only 50 feet. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we should be winding this down apparently to 50 feet below our landing elevation. However, you'll notice that actually we can't go into negative numbers, so we'll put it down to just the lowest, which is 0. This helps with depressurizing the plane once we've landed again, but also it's your standby system. Now what happened with the Helios plane is that they had it in standby, and for whatever reason, because it was in standby, it didn't pressurize. They didn't pick up on the fact it didn't pressurize. When the altitude horn started sounding, they just cancelled it. In fact, no, sorry, my bad. They didn't cancel it, they just ignored it. As I say, the difficulty was, and there's books and books and books written about this subject. It seems so ridiculously simple. It's not. Trust me, guys, when things start going wrong in the air, it's really, really difficult at times to actually figure out what the heck is going on. And when your gear config horn is exactly the same noise as your pressurization, oh, hello, as your pressurization warning, then that's, you know, surely that's a recipe for disaster. It's only going to be a matter of time before something goes horribly wrong with that set of circumstances. So we will put ours back into auto, however, and as we can see, the light has nicely extinguished. So again, this aircraft has a lot of history. People often talk about the scare bus in terms of the Airbus, but in reality this thing also had its fair share of moments. I haven't read too much into it, but I know it had some fin stability issues, particularly in relation to, I believe there were issues in relation to the rudder trims or the elements in terms of the actuation of the rudders. Either way, it's got 2 rudder systems, and one of the key things that it brought up is it's also got a yaw damper up here, so a visual representation of the yaw damper. The yaw damper, by the way, acts in series with the rudder pedals, so even if it's moving the rudder left and right to dampen out the oscillations in yaw, you don't feel it through the pedals. It's as I say, it's in series, so yeah. That's pretty much all ready to go. So in terms of flaps, we'll just drop down to flaps 5, which is what we said we'd do. Just give it a chance to come down. We'll just set ourselves up so the top panel's done. Quite happy that all this panel is done to the best of our abilities at the moment. Flaps needs to go all the way to 5. Auto brake goes to RTO. Everything else around here is fine that I can think of. As I say, I'm not doing the full checklist. I just want to get us airborne now. We've spent long enough on the ground. One of the things different from an Airbus, for example, is you don't need to put the speed brake into a detent for takeoff. It's fine where it is. It works out that you're going to crash before you do. Now, we'll just do a quick recall, make sure there's nothing there. and there is nothing. Now at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of powering this beastie up and getting it off the ground. You will see that we're going to have some changes in indication. It does come up with a roll mode. It does come up with a pitch suggestion, which is basically toga. But at the moment, obviously, we've got no autopilot plugged in. So what we're going to do now is going to power up the engines, take the brakes off, stand the throttles up, make sure they power up nicely. We're not getting anything untoward behaviour. And this is one of the things I was saying about, you can see the symmetry between the needles here. Very easy with big white needles to see the symmetry. If anything was off, it would become immediately apparent because the needles wouldn't match. And the one thing that's standing out here, look, is oil quantity. We've got reduced oil quantity in the right engine compared to the left engine. For our purposes today, that's largely academic. What we'll do actually, very bad practice, we're going to just pop that onto the legs page so we can follow through with that. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to press our toga switch, and for me, being the absolute winner that I am, I haven't actually mapped a button. Or I don't think I have. Have I mapped a button? Let me press that, see what happens. Oh, I have! Woohoo! And we've also had no warnings. So away we go. And you can see what I mean about the screen shake, but it's not excessive because I can still go down and press that button if I wanted. So let's just keep ourselves alive. You can see now it's gone to N1 power setting toga with heading select pre-selected there. We're coming up towards a V1 rotate. V1 rotate. Gear can go up, positive rate, and climbing towards V2 plus 15, which is the that little marker there. Okay, now we're more than 400 feet above the ground, so this is where we can get happy and we can play with what we'll do is we'll actually play with LNAV. We're also 1,000 feet above the ground, so we can play with VNAV, and we can plug in our autopilot, get you. And what we can also do is we can make sure that we start to clear away the flaps. And that is pretty much that. Flaps coming up nicely, and away we go. Now for me, I'm pretty much happy with that. That's gone well so far. Beautiful, and we're accelerating now to 250. You can see the speed bugs move around automatically to 250, which is the VNAV speed. That looks very nice. Southeast of England, beautiful. I say that with tongue-in-cheek because I don't live there. We've got a bit of weather coming in, looking at the outside air. Yeah, where's the outside air in this thing? Outside air. Outside air. You know what? I haven't got a clue where it is. So, in that case, what we're going to do is just going to chuck the anti-ice on anyway. I'm having a bit of a brain fart moment there, so I'm also having a bit of a brain fart moment with these switches, look. Oh. I hate it when you try and click across for two switches, but because of the angle you can't actually reach the second one. So it's just levelling us at 4,000 feet, it's come back, and if we look at the modes now, FMC speed means the speed is being controlled by the FMC. That's what's choosing the speed. VNAV path means that our vertical profile is being controlled by the pitch of the aircraft. LNAV means our lateral navigation is being controlled by the aircraft in terms of LNAV, and also command shows that we are the autopilot is in command and that we're flying with the autopilot in control. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to do a flight level change. We're going to start to go up and just ignore the SID at this point. In fact, what we'll do, where are we? See, now this is one of the advantages in terms of this this system. Now I can see exactly what I've got on my display before I even look up. Really do like that, rate that highly. It's one of the most frustrating things is when you're flying an airliner and you have to do a look down, and when you look up you go, well, that's not what I wanted. What we're going to do is we're going to do level change, so let's select our new altitude. We'll go all the way to 18, and in the meantime we're going to discuss things. Now we're not going to fly the entire route. Level change, there we go. Not going to fly the entire route, we're just going to get going that way and see how we get on. Let's get into the climb. What we can do, however, is our after climb checks. So at this point what we're going to do is we're going to go up here. These don't need to be continuous anymore. So they can go like that. The next thing that we can do is we can come down here. The gear lever goes into the off position. Now, one of the things I don't like about X-Plane 10 is the click and drag system, because if you've got a 3-position switch and you've got good position, bad position, sometimes it's very easy to go just a little bit too far past the midpoint and you start turning stuff off at the worst possible moment. But we didn't know, we survived. Auto brake can come off. And then just a quick look down here, we would make sure the transponder's on, for example. That would have gone on beforehand, but TCAS doesn't work in this. And I also should have put these down to -20 for the takeoff, which is, you know, heck, we're alive. We're surviving here. So really, that's pretty much most of it done. That after takeoff flow, by the way, that's got nothing to do with the real aircraft. That's something that I've just... I fly a lot of aircraft, and sometimes it's almost impossible to remember the flows of every single aircraft. So you kind of get to the point of just developing your own stuff over time, and it's incredibly bad as a habit. However, this is not a tutorial for how to fly a 737 Classic. It's just to look at the aircraft and the modelling. Let's just quickly jump outside. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned much up till now is the sound pack. So what I can do is I can go back to my preferences, not that preferences, the other preferences. I can go back into here and go to pre-flight, is it? No, not that one. Is it preferences? Did I misclick? There we go. The sounds in this thing, I hope you agree, are absolutely delightful. And you can hear them as I move around. Sounds fantastic, and it does have a really good appearance. As I say, externally it's 90% of the way there for me. It's just scruffy at places, and I'm sure there's going to be aircraft texture painters out there who will have a marvellous time trying to do textures for this aircraft. That's assuming they can get the paint kit to do so. I don't really understand much about that witchcraft myself, but we'll turn that back down again, because otherwise it's going to become... It's nice to listen to, but actually what we'll do is we'll just leave it up. We'll just jump inside, and you can hear the noises inside. The trim wheel, the metallic clack of the trim wheel is great. A little bit of interesting stuff reading through the details. There's a number of ways that the trim system is powered. One of which is you can just turn this wheel by hand. However, you need the main and the standby hydraulics that activate the stabilizer to be off, because when you activate this by hand, you fold out a little handle that's here, and then you sort of use it as a drum wheel. If for whatever reason there was any kickback because the hydraulics were still working and trying to operate the surfaces, this little arm, if it's stuck out, is enough to break your leg apparently. So yeah, one to watch out for if you ever get a chance to sit in the passenger seat. However, 3D cockpit environment, very nice. What altitude are we at? Oh, we're past that. So let's do our dutiful airliner pilot thing. Right, what we will do is we'll pop over here. We're only going up to 18,000 feet, so it shouldn't be a massive issue. However, down here you can see there's a cabin index for altitude, so we're only going to flight level 18. Not really a massive issue, but it shows you the pressure differential you should get across the aircraft. So in terms of the pressure differential, it's shown here with the cabin rate of climb. This is your pressure differential here on the outside. So at the moment it's at 6.4, and here's your sort of cabin altitude in effect. So you know, this is the kind of thing that when I did my MCC course, my multi-crew cooperation, actually it was actually on the CRJ 200 we were doing it in the sim, but one of the key elements they then stipulate is that at 10,000 feet, yes, it's all very exciting to turn the lights off. Having the lights on above 10,000 feet doesn't kill you. Having no pressurization may well kill you. So they were keen to promote the idea that there's two straightforward, simple checks, not just the landing lights, but also let's have a look at the pressurization, because it's at that point it becomes pertinent. And here we go, we're away, 18,000 feet. This trim wheel goes absolutely crazy, it goes clackers. This aircraft does need a lot of trimming. The main reason for that is because you've got these two engines are low slung podded engines, and as a result any major power changes, there's a lot of nose up or nose down pitch dependent on these. So yeah, really nice stuff. Now at this point I'm going to break the video. I'm going to take us over towards because this is just boring airways now. There's nothing exciting now. I'm not doing an FMC challenge in this because at the moment the aircraft isn't really in a position where I would be comfortable doing that. This is the thing, is that you've got to remember at the moment that this is basically an unfinished product. A lot of people have been lauding praise over it, and I think there's a certain amount of merit to be given there. However, the key thing is, this is like the unfinished symphony. You know, you've listened to the first half of the symphony, you've gone, absolutely stunning. That was amazing. That was just jaw-droppingly beautiful as an event. Really enjoyed that. Just can't wait for the next bit, and then the next bit doesn't arrive, and that's the key with this at the moment, is there's a lot of features that haven't been implemented, so it's kind of like that unfinished symphony. You can see it's leveled out nicely, unlike the early problems that people had with XP UIPC when there was a compatibility issue. There's no pogoing, there's no changing of altitude plus or minus 200 feet. There are elements of this where it does have nice little tweaks and nice little touches, like you see the power gauges in terms of their movement and the EGTs. Slight differences across the two throttles. What I will do is at this point, and I'll just wiggle these. This is a nice feature, I really like this. The white sort of oblongy shapy things are where my throttle levers are. The grey ones are where the aircrafts are at the moment in terms of auto throttle, and it's a nice feature that I can just basically line these up and know that my throttles in my left hand are in the same sort of reference position as these two are. What does it mean? Well, it means a great deal really, because if you unplug the auto throttles, if you twitch these slightly, the computer senses the position of your throttle. So let's say these are way up here, and I disengage the auto throttle and I move these for whatever, the engine is just going to ramp straight up to that engine power setting. A bit awkward if you're trying to do an ILS or a precision approach or something of that nature. So nice touch, like the way it fades away, and this is what I'm saying with this really. $75 is a premium product, you're paying a lot of money, you expect a lot of aircraft. Probably what we've got is a lot of very good aircraft, but we've not got all of the very good aircraft, and that's the bit I think I'm really waiting for, is to see how this matures, I think is the best way of describing it. What's the waypoint after Honolly? Because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go direct to the waypoint before Honolly. Get an FMC message, drag required. Well, we're not going to give you drag because we're not going down now. What I can do though is I can go into heading select and we can come around here, and throughout all of this is the autopilot. We're going to take the autopilot off. We do get the audio alert. I'm going to take the auto throttle off. No audio alert, but you see now I've got my little indicators here that I can pick up the auto throttle positions. Right, what we're going to do is just going to fly around for a bit of general handling really. Nothing too dramatic. Right. This thing is really nice to hand fly. I can't say that highly enough. It's really nice to hand fly. It's got a lot of stability to it. It responds nicely, so if I go full left and full right, you can see there's a lot of inertia in this thing. I'll go full right, full left, full right, and consequently there's two issues. It's slow to respond, so there's a risk of having a pilot-induced oscillation where you're wiggling the stick around and nothing's happening particularly, and what's happening is the aircraft hasn't responded to your inputs because you're just putting too many in too short a period of time. Look, you know, I can wiggle the stick and the aircraft doesn't really do much. You can hear the mechanics trying to keep up, but fundamentally it's not really doing a great deal. Oh, nice time for X-Plane 10 to pause. There we go, we're just going to dodge around this cloud. So in terms of the handling, it's very nice. It's got a lot of stability. I can take my hands off the controls once it's trimmed. It does take a lot to trim it because of that pitch power couple, but you can see I can take my hands off the controls. It's not doing anything scary. It is quite nice and responsive when you're going through the process of doing a descent and approach. You know, it's really good in that respect. In terms of pitch and pitch stability, I can pitch down, and you can see immediately it starts to gain speed, it starts to pitch up, it's got good pitch stability. I would expect this, if I just pop outside, it's not going to throw itself out the sky whilst I do this. It's got a power and a pitch setting, a trim setting, that means it will eventually stabilise at A pitch and A speed without me having to interfere too much with it. It's quite a good system that the aerodynamicists have tagged hold of there. The aircraft has two features that give it lateral stability. Now I've noticed with this it seems to be fairly neutral. The first one is swept wings. Swept wings give it quite a lot of sort of stability in the roll sense. So if you have one wing drop, the change in the lift and drag profile of the wing as that action takes place means that in theory it should pick itself up. And you can see actually we're getting a reasonable pitch and power variation there. That means we're getting an oscillation, a fugoid oscillation, I believe it's called, in the pitch of the aircraft. But we've got this gradual turn, so it's not positive stability in the roll sense, which in fairness it should be. The aircraft's got some dihedral. You can see this sort of bowl shape almost to the wings, and in addition it's also got the swept wings, so it should have some element of stability to it in that sense, but I don't see a great deal of it. If I look, yeah, it's just continually turning around to the right. So what I can do is I've got just check there's neutral trim positions just in case that was having an effect. But I don't think so. No, they're both neutral. Look, rudder and aileron are both in neutral trim positions. So yeah, it's got no real intent of coming out of this this gradual turn that we're in. However, not to worry. What we're going to do is we're going to go down and we're going to slow down and then go down. And in doing so, what we're going to do is we're going to set ourselves up for an approach into Cambridge. Now the altitude for Cambridge we're going to go down to is 1700. Look at that, there you go, there's one of the bugs. Eventually it comes back. I assume it's because we went too far, but nonetheless it's decided it's going to do that. We're going to leave the speed well alone, we're not going to mess around with that, and we're going to go down to 1700, and pretty much where we're at is good for that at the minute. So we're going to do some pre-landings. These are my rough and ready. These are not to be used unless under extreme duress. So auto brake 3, and we will stick the speed brake. Now this is one of the things that frustrates me, is trying to find that detent. You only know if you've got the speed brake armed light that comes on there. So speed's coming back very slowly. We don't want to descend too much. What we want is to get the speed back. I'm going to go out here. So the go down and the slow down. We're trying not to do too much of the slow down at the minute. However, we do need to use our pitch to control that, because we also don't want to speed up, but we do want to get down. This aircraft is what I would term as a trim intensive. You have to keep on top of the trim, and I mean, to be honest, that's to be expected. So what we're looking to do here is, you can see we've got the 15-mile circle on that we put here earlier. What we're looking to do is going to come around and come in, and we're going to try and intercept the centre line. Woohoo! We've got out the clouds. Whoop whoop! Everyone's a winner. So we're coming down quite quickly now, just mindful of the speed creeping back up again. There's quite a few documents out there that do give handy tips in terms of pitch and power settings for where your little jobber should be here in terms of you know, the number of degrees of units of pitch. And deselect that. We will pre-select that. We'll deselect that. So as I say, one of the things you can do is you can mess around and choose which ones you want. So we will actually have that one back. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring it round here like this. I'm just going to turn onto that in a minute. In the meantime, what we're going to do is go down here, init ref, and we're going to go with flaps 30 landing 127. Plug that in as our VREF. So we'll just have a cheeky little VREF mentioned on this display here. That'll do us. What we'll do actually is we'll set the speed to the speed bug here to 132, which is VREF plus 5. And we'll see how we get on. So as we're coming down now, I'm just going to level us off a little bit to let the speed bleed away a little bit more. We've got some indications now for localizer and glide slope. Top tip here, if you're ever doing an ILS, do not descend with the glide slope unless you've got the localizer. The main reason being is that if you imagine yourself as being in a valley, the localizer being the safe bit within the valley, You're going to get a slight ballooning lift with the lift change profile there from the flaps. If you imagine yourself in a valley, to the left and right is certain death, in the middle is the safe bit if you were to descend. If you start descending with a glide slope but you're not within that nice safe confines of the valley, you're going to get yourself hurt, because basically what's going to happen is you're going to smash into the sides. So two key tips for ILSs. The first one is always join an ILS from beneath, because one of the things you do get is false glide slopes, and so you should never join the glide slope from above. The second thing is do not descend with a glide slope until your localizer established, and you'll hear in the UK certainly one of the common calls for aircraft in ATC is they'll go localizer established. To tell ATC they've got the localizer, they will be descending with a glide slope shortly. So we're just above 170. 170 is the kind of point where we can start to think about flaps 15 and gear down. Haven't got any indications in terms of the airfield as of yet. We are coming into a nice gradual turn onto it, and you can hear the trim functioning there. Just watching the speed. I've just put some power on so you can see that it's pitched up. Bring a bit of power off and it pitches back down again. So what we're going to do now is we'll get down below 170 and we can configure. We can go gear down, flap 15. You don't use flaps 2 and flaps 10, they're just not used. There's a bit of a balloon there. What we do need to do is just maintain our altitude and maintain our speed. You can see the green trend arrow showing our speeds now back down to 150. We're not descending with a glide slope yet, so I'm not going to drop the next stage of flaps. The airfield is visual there on the nose. Climbed 100 feet, that's really bad. Having said that, we're still on the still below glide slope, so that's not a massive issue at the minute. Now you can see beneath the green writing on the primary flight display there, on the ADI, you can see we've got the little text here in the grey, glide slope, vertical speed. That's basically the armed modes ready for the glide path. Slightly left of centerline, nothing too dramatic. We are, however, 100 feet high, which is dramatic. We don't want to be doing that. Glide slopes coming in as well. Beautiful aircraft to hand fly, I have to say. Take the next stage of flaps, which is flaps 25. Do get a big balloon with that one. Now we're going to come in at about 132, I think it was, I said. So 132 equates to about 600 feet a minute rate of descent, there or thereabouts. That should keep you on the glide slope. So we'll let the speed come off. We'll take our next stage of flap, which is flap 30. Just a quick check, yep. So our VREF is just in the little green arrow, as we see down there. Nice bit of trim just to get us stabilised. Just watching the speed now, we're at 132, little green F is just below us, pretty much on centerline, pretty much on glide slope. Should have turned that off ages ago, to be fair. So on centerline, on glide slope, slightly right of centerline now, so correcting. Just watching the rate of descent and the speed. This is where you watch those like a hawk. So rate of descent's at 700, which is nice for this speed. It should be that we can keep ourselves on glide slope with just the bare minimum of changes. You can hear me just tweaking the trims to manage that. Throttle's fairly consistent because we're making such small changes. It shouldn't make too much of a change to the power settings that we need. We've got a fairly stable wind. We're just getting blown a little bit from right to left. Just monitoring that. We're going slightly high. Unlike a light aircraft, slightly fast as well. Unlike a light aircraft, throttle controls speed and pitch controls your rate of descent. Light aircraft, they do it the other way round. So a light aircraft, you use power to change rate of descent, but in a jet, you basically drive it at the ground. So we are fully visual now. 2 whites, 2 reds. Just trying to make sure we get it nicely on the centre line. What I don't want to do is dip a wing, because we've got fairly low pods. Very easy to scrape a pod on one of these things. You'll see videos of it all over the place on YouTube. Should be 50 over the threshold. Taking the power off too early. Get the reversers. We'll bring it to a halt. So there we go, safely arrived at Cambridge. I'm just going to do a final bit of a natter really, and we'll pop outside for that. So what are my thoughts on this thing? It's like the bright kid who's not really bothered with the exams yet, in as much as it's got a lot of potential. It's just not quite there at the minute. The key thing here is the developers know it's not quite there, and they're keen to get it there. So although it's been released early, and some would say too early, what I would say is that actually I quite like the half-finished sort of performance we've got in terms of that sort of that symphony, that orchestral performance. We've got half of the performance, and the half we've got is exceptionally good. We just need the other half to come along, and the sooner the better. So the key thing that remains is it worth $75? Well, for $75, it's the most expensive aircraft add-on that there is for X-Plane 10 that I am aware of. Therefore, the bar it set itself, the standard it set itself, is exceptionally high. Now, it could be argued that if you were to compare it with, say, the RotateSim MD80 or the Flight Factor stuff, that actually for the $15 or $10 compared to the Flight Factor, you're getting a much better product. And I would agree, you are getting a better product. What I would say is you're getting a less well finished product, not because of poor design, but just because it's a 3-person team who work part-time in their spare time to develop that. And the mere fact that we've got this, in some respects, is testament to the quality of their work and their effort, how much hard work and effort they're putting in. For which I think, there needs to be a certain element of recognition here. That's where we're at. This thing is an incredibly complex thing to design and develop, and despite all of the things I've found with it, they have done it to a certain extent. Now, I'm quite sure that in my video I haven't done it full justice. The thing I haven't mentioned thus far, which I will mention now, is the inside of the cockpit. The sound modelling is just stupendous. I wonder. That window's not opening. Let me just see if it does that, I'm going to be super oh my lord. Now that has impressed me. That seriously impressed me. That I couldn't open the window because of the pressurization until I'd depressurized the aircraft. That I am seriously impressed with. And the noise modelling as well. I cannot get over the noise modelling of this aircraft. Superb sound pack to it. So it's that unfinished symphony really, isn't it? That unfinished sort of classical symphony. I would suggest that for $75, just be aware of the limitations of the product, and just be aware that it's not going to be able to do it's not going to display the same comprehensive number of functionalities as, say, the 737 NGX for Flight Sim, FSX or P3D does. It doesn't have that quite same completeness or roundedness to the product yet. The bit they've delivered, I think, is exceptionally good. I have a really good time flying this aircraft, and just the way it is, I can't put into words why this aircraft has captivated me. Maybe it's because it's got a bit more of a checkered history than the NGX or the NG. Maybe it's because it's a bit more steam dial and less telly. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. You would argue that this is the less complete of the two products, but I would argue personally, for me, it's got a lot more in terms of character. Certainly one of the things that is an absolute peach with this, and I will say it time and time again, the flying and handling characteristics of this thing are just absolutely spot on. But IXEG, as a team of developers, one of them is a commercial 737 pilot. If they'd screwed the handling up, I would have had real concerns over the rest of the product, because if there's one thing they should get right with a 737 pilot on crew, it's the handling. For me, this thing flies like a dream. It's got a good level of stability. It's very responsive when you need it to be responsive in approach. You know, I haven't gone into a lot of the things that I would like to test. I'd like to see what it's like in terms of looking at all of the stability and all of the axes. I'd like to go and have a look at it in terms of see what happens if I turn the yaw damper off and try and provoke some Dutch roll at altitude. Dutch roll, by the way, is an inherent problem for swept wing aircraft. Virtually every commercial aircraft has a yaw damper these days, but it was an inherent problem with the link between lateral and longitudinal roll, if you like, and lateral stability, yaw stability of an aircraft, particularly prone with swept wing jets. Guys, there's a few bugs in it. It's to be expected. It's a fairly new release. There are quite a few limitations, everything from TCAS to some of the pages in the FMC. I don't think any of them at this point mean that it's something that you can't enjoy, but what I do wish is that you need to go and look at the limitations on, I think the list of them is on the X-Aviation forums. Go and have a look before you buy. Go and have a look and see if the things that you need are implemented there or not. Just be conscious that some of the things are yet to be put in place, so there's still work in progress for a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's been done very nicely in terms of the menus. I like this menu system. I really hate that. For me, I hate that because it broke my my presets in my other aircraft. And there's a lot of good things that are mess-aroundable with it. For me, I really enjoy it. I always, as ever, come into these things very open-minded and very skeptical in many respects. One of the interesting things for me has been learning a bit more about the classic and the nuances of operating it. And as I say, the fact that it's just a generation before the current sort of jets, for me, just brings it a little bit of character. I like looking at steam gauges, round dials and that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing for me that that makes a really nice jet. And with that in mind, guys, I shall bid you farewell. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.